Yeah, go ahead, clicker. Take it away, man.
All right, everybody in person, get your binoculars out, and then everybody online, turn up your speakers. I'll try my best here. All right, my name is Matt. If you don't know me, you might have seen my work. So I took a lot of shots of Kips, Rocket, Mesos. If you are Tripoli, you might have seen this on the website. If you're NAR, these two pictures might look familiar. These are from LDRS 39 at the Salt Flats, and they ended up on the. Yep, that's Bryce's rocket that we were talking about, Bryce Cheney's rocket on the left there. That rocket's like 200 something pounds and like 16 feet tall or something like that. Pretty wacky. I think it's a cluster of like 6 motors. Pretty neat. So my objective today, I'm trying to do here. So I'm not going to get too into the weeds. I'm going to try my best to not get too into the weeds on like how cameras work and things like that. So Tim, shut up. I know. I'm gonna, but I will go into it a little bit to just try and level with everybody, so you can kind of see. I kind of want to show you guys what I do, how I do it. Maybe you'll learn some things here and there. Some tips and tricks, and just generally what I do. So with that, I'm gonna try and keep it under 30 minutes. We'll see what happens. This has been around 30 minutes. So equipment. Okay. So what do you have? Everybody's got a phone, right? Everybody's got a smartphone. The best camera, it's often said the best camera is the one that you have. So if everybody's got a phone, smartphone cameras have been getting pretty dang good as of late. And it's a perfectly valid thing to use, especially for documentation purposes, right? If you want to review your launch after you launched, having shot a video of your rocket going up is really, really useful, especially something suboptimal happens, right? Why use your phone? So this is a picture I took of Kip recovering the sustainer. It landed out in the mountains away from Black Rock. And we hiked like 2 miles off the beaten path, climbed up a mountain like 1,000 feet, right? And I was carrying recovery gear so that he was gonna get there. He carried the rocket back, and I don't want to carry a camera 2 miles if I don't have to while I've got other stuff to carry, right? So I said screw that, and I just used my phone, and that was fine, right? Okay, so why not use a phone though? Let's see. Okay, so that picture is a picture that my buddy took. He's actually a really good photographer. He just didn't have his camera this day, but he took a picture of Mesos at FAR in May of last year. And, it's a good photo. It's got good composition. We'll talk about what that means later. Here's a photo I took from approximately the same distance. So with these cameras, you can take off the lenses. You can put on different ones, right? You can get different zoom, different, settings and whatnot. And then also the sensors. So if you look at your phone, you've got these little baby cameras, and they all have tiny sensors, right? So even though one of these is like 100 megapixels, if you look at the sensor, this is a 40 megapixel camera. The sensor's gigantic, right? So generally speaking, even like a 20 megapixel camera is going to be far better than a 100 megapixel phone camera. It's just a better piece of equipment. It's purpose built for the task, right? Okay, why not use a camera? Well, we're all into rocketry, right? And you can ask anybody, well, hey, why not get into rocketry? I don't want to. Okay, that's fine. That's okay, right? It's a whole thing. And then often cameras, they can be an investment. It's a whole, they can cost money. I'd always thought before I got into photography that it was going to cost me like thousands of dollars, and that's why I never got into it. But a buddy of mine was into photography, and he told me that he got his camera for like $400 with a lens. So if that persuades you to get a camera, there you go. That's what you needed. So let's talk about some basic photography principles real quick. I'll try and breeze through these a little bit. But the whole idea is that you're trying to collect light on the sensor. That's what photography is. You're collecting light. As if you got a whole bunch of buckets and you're trying to collect a certain amount of water in each one of the buckets, you got photocells on this sensor and you're trying to collect a specific amount of photons on those photocells, right? And if you collect too much, it's kind of like when you go to the doctors and you get your eyes dilated and it's just way too bright, right? Everything's completely blown out. And that's what we call overexposed. So on the right, we got, I think it's Joe's rocket at Black Rock. On the right, it's overexposed. On the left, we didn't collect enough light, it's underexposed. In the middle, it's a properly exposed photo. That's how it's supposed to look, right?
You just mute yourself.
I don't know, did I?
I can
Oh,
still-
no,
we
because
can still
it's,
hear you.
yeah, thanks though. So we control the exposure via 3 settings: shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. The shutter speed is how fast, there's a little curtain that goes in front of the sensor, and the shutter speed is how long the sensor is exposed to light when the curtain does its thing. It can go anywhere from over a second. You know, I've done shots that are like 2 minutes long of the sensor just being exposed to light, and also, you know, like 1/8,000th of a second. So it goes anywhere in between, and it's important for freezing subjects. So when a rocket launches, you want a fairly fast shutter speed so that you can catch it and stop it so it's not blurry. So I usually shoot at, when I'm shooting rocketry, I usually shoot at like 1/4000th of a second or faster. Aperture is a little diaphragm in the lens. I can't really show you because the lens elements are crazy, but it's a series of blades that opens and closes to allow a specific amount of light to pass through the lens onto the sensor. It also controls something called depth of field. For the purposes of today's presentation, we don't really need to get into it because it's not really useful. We always just shoot, I shoot wide open, which means I shoot with the aperture blades completely open to allow as much light in as possible. Because my shutter speed's really fast, and that allows not very much light in. So I try to compensate by having a wide open aperture. ISO is a gain knob for the sensor. It's a gain value for the sensor. So if those first 2 variables are, you know, producing an underexposed image, you can use ISO, you can crank that up, and it's basically just like adjusting the sensitivity of the sensor and cranking it up artificially, and then it will work. That has its own problems. You don't really want to, if you find that your ISO is greater than like a value of 400, 100 is baseline. If it's above like 400, you're gonna start to get some noise. That's a whole conversation on its own, so we'll just skip past that. All right, how do you like your steak? Who here likes to, who likes their steak rare? By show of hands. Medium rare? Okay, cool. Who here cooks their own steak? Who here would rather go to Texas Roadhouse? Right on. Okay, so this is an argument of JPEG versus RAW. So RAW, these are file types, by the way. So when I take pictures with my camera, it's going to output a file type, and it's either going to be RAW or JPEG, almost always. I shoot in RAW, you can shoot in JPEG. It depends on what you want to do. If you are editing your own photos, almost always shoot in RAW. There's very little argument to be made to shoot in JPEG if you're editing your own photos. And the reason for that is because if you look at what I've done in Microsoft Paint, you got an upper brightness limit and a lower brightness limit of like your screen, right? Your screen's upper brightness limit is literally just white. The lower brightness limit is just black, and that's it. A RAW photo, this camera will, when you shoot the photo in RAW, even if something is completely black on the screen, when you put it on your computer, you can go into your editing software and bring up the brightness or bring up the shadows, and it will yoink out detail as if from magic. Same thing with the highlights. If you bring down the highlights, if something's completely white and you bring down the highlights, as if from magic, things start to appear again. JPEG, that doesn't work. It doesn't do that. It cooks your steak for you, right? So, pros and cons. So with the RAWs, you get all that recoverable data, but at the expense of a gigantic file. This camera's a 40 megapixel camera, so the file size is approximately 40 megabytes. But the JPEG equivalent would be like 20, maybe even less. So the camera won't buffer out as fast. So if you are a Texas Roadhouse person, right, and you don't really want to edit your own photos, you can throw it on JPEG and just, and hold that shutter down, and it'll never fill up your memory card, and it won't ever buffer, and you'll get every shot that you want. But I prefer RAW. Here's an example of this. So this is a picture of Kip's rocket from far. I'll talk more about this photo in a minute. This is the original. I intentionally underexposed the photo because I know that Kip's propellant is bright, and I don't want the highlights in the exhaust to blow out. So I intentionally underexposed it to keep those highlights. But am I going to post the photo like that? No, it's raw. So I edit it, and that's the photo that I, produced, and voila, right? So let's say the launch got delayed for whatever the reason may be. Kip couldn't get a GPS fix, and I couldn't go to my camera. There was a remote. So say I couldn't go to my camera, I couldn't change the settings, and the day went from 9 a.m. to like noon or 1, and the day got a lot brighter. And we overexposed it. And let's say we shot in JPEG. It would have cooked the photo like this. This is now a cooked steak. Can you uncook a steak? No. You can freeze it, and it's not going to uncook it, right? It's going to look really weird. So this is what happens if I take the brightness on that JPEG and I drag it down in post. And here it is compared to the RAW. So you can see it loses a lot of its color, it loses a lot of the detail, right? So I shoot in RAW so that if something like that happens, at least there's a chance that I'm going to recover some of that data. And if I screw up the settings, right? What if I screw up the settings a little bit? That's possible too, and so I want to shoot in RAW so I can get that data back. All right. Focus, this will be very brief. So most cameras, when you click the shutter button, they come from the factory such that when you half press the shutter button, it focuses, and then you fully depress the shutter button, and it takes the photo, right? And I think most of them are, they'll just do that, they'll click away, right? That's not great, especially for this type of photography. If you've got a rocket that's out there, 200 feet away, and you focus on it, that's great. But if you got something that's continuously focusing, guess what? That's a skinny little rocket on a skinny little rail with a very big background, right? And so the camera's going to be going, is this the thing you want to focus on, or is it that over there? Whoop, 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 and it's going to be seeking, right, forever. That sucks. So instead, I rebind, and most professional photographers do this, they rebind the focus button to back button here. This back button, focus, here. There you go. And so what that does is I can focus on the rocket, and then when I see that it's focused, I let go of the button, and it stops trying to focus. And then I click away, and then I don't click that button again until the rocket's in the air going away from me, and then it will try and focus on the rocket, but it's still, even then the rocket's tiny, it tries to seek between the sky and the rocket. But that's how I shoot.
Quick question for you.
Yeah.
When I shoot, I notice that almost everything that I do ends up being focused at infinity anyway, and so usually I'll just set my lens that way and leave it. I don't know if you find that situation or if they're,
It depends on the lens. Yeah, so what he's talking about is a hyperfocal distance. That's a whole getting in the weeds thing, but what happens is sometimes if something is far enough away and you focus on it, the camera will be focused on infinity, and so all the light entering the lens will be parallel anyway. And so you can just focus on infinity, and then you'll just be focused on the rocket all the time. When I'm shooting like orbital rockets, that's what I do. I just set it on infinity and then I let it rip. And if you find that the rocket is beyond the hyperfocal distance of your lens in that configuration, by all means, just focus on infinity and then it will just always be in focus, for sure.
Are you doing spot or matrix or?
I do matrix. I do like a small cluster matrix. Okay, composition and timing. So composition is what it sounds like. It's what composes the photo, right? These are two examples of bad composition, in my opinion. These are photos I took at the first ever rocket launch I attended back in like 2021. And I had no idea how fast these rockets went. So I aimed directly at the rocket in that first one. I'm like, all right, I'm ready. And then caught the tail end of it, right? So when would you guys, knowing what you know, when would you start clicking the button? One. Okay. Problem with that is if it takes too long to light, then it can buffer out. And so it'll go brrr, click, 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 you know. But there is a use that, so if you're, it depends on the propellant, right? We all have been doing this, you know, most of us have been doing this for a while. We know that some propellants are slower to light, some propellants light and they just go, right? So most of the time, usually, you can see the igniter, you can see the smoke from the igniter kind of go like that. You see the motor starting to catch. As soon as I see smoke, I know it's going to go, and I start pressing, right? But if it's like a, you know, a Super Thunder motor or, you know, something like that that just goes, then I just, as soon as I hear, you know, 3, 2, 1, launch, I just start going and hope I get it because there's no telltale sign of that going. It just goes. So on the right side, as you can see, I kind of borked that. But why do you think I did that? Why do you think I aimed higher?
You thought it was going to jump and it didn't.
Yeah. So I thought it was going to catch it, right? I was trying to catch it. And did it work?
No.
Yes! Yes, it did. So that is an idea. Nowadays, I don't shoot horizontally as much. I shoot in portrait mode or vertically because there's more room for the rocket to move in the photo. And I'll show you that right now, slowly but surely. Okay, so these two shots look like they were taken at different zoom settings, right? It looks like I took my lens and I went, you know, like that as it was launching. But as we know, rockets go fast and that's not possible. These were literally, you know, one frame after the other, so like 0.7 seconds between the two, or 1.3 seconds or whatever it is. Anyway, so how did I accomplish this? By the magic use of cropping. I learned that it is better to take wide photos, even though it's gonna be a little bit more pixelated because the rocket's clear out there in the photo. You know, it won't be as nice, but it's better to take a wide shot because there's a better chance of the rocket being in the shot. It's better to get a little bit blurrier or like pixelated, you know, zoomed out picture than no usable picture at all. And on that note, sorry online folks, you won't be able to see this, but I got this little 300mm lens and I got this big chunker 600mm lens. Which one do you think is better for shooting the mid-power pads?
300.
The 300. It is like less than half the weight, right? And why would I even need to zoom to 600mm, which, you know, puts the rocket like, if this is the frame, the rocket's like this big in the frame. There's no way I'm going to catch it. So having this light little lens and being able to just like flick it up is way better. And I learned that, you know, I got this, I'm like excited to use it, and I took it out to a launch and then figured out, you know, 8 pounds is hard to move really fast. So, you know, lessons learned. Okay, here's another example of cropping. So this was a remote shot taken at my buddy's sub-minimum diameter L1000. The one on the left was just cropped, right? It's the same exact shot, just one of them on the left is cropped a little bit more than the one on the right to make it look more interesting, because if I had cropped it the same way as the one on the right, we'd have all this empty sky. And for what purpose does that serve in the photo? Right? It doesn't look as nice. There's a lot of, I mean, empty space is great sometimes, but for the purpose of this, it's better to, you know, the subject at hand is the rocket that's on fire. And then on the right side, I should have learned my lesson. That is touching the top of the frame, and that is literally the next shot. And this camera shoots at like 7 frames per second, or 9 frames per second, or something like that. I should have known better. I should have taken the camera further back so it got a more wide angle. But I even tried to shoot my own rocket a couple Sundays ago with the last UROC launch, and I did the same exact thing. My rocket was like halfway out of the photo. I should have learned my lesson, but I didn't. So go wider than you think. Okay, we can't move the rockets to make our photo prettier, right? We can't go out there and move them. But what we can move is our feet. If you're taking pictures through the model rocket pads, maybe move your feet, right? And get away from the model rocket pads to get a better photo. If you got houses in the background, but the mountains are right here, maybe move your body over here so you can get the mountains in the background and not the houses. In this particular case, I tried my best, but there were 3 peaks in the background that I noticed kind of lined up with the rockets, and I thought it looked really nice. So I tried to move myself so that they were, you know, centered, but it worked kind of well, you know, it did okay. And then, you know, here are just some remote shots. Sometimes, you know, if you see on the bottom middle there's Troy's rocket. And sometimes you don't have to center the rocket in the frame. Sometimes having it off to the side is nice. Troy's rocket kind of went and did this pretty little curve thing I thought was really nice, so I offset it to the side and made it, you know, I thought it looked really good. And then the rocket on the bottom right there with the windsock, I thought made a really nice composition that wasn't just rocket dead center, right? Okay, remote cameras. So this here is a remote camera. And what it does, how it works, is I've got a sound trigger on the top. And so if I turn this on and I bop the sound trigger, right? So whenever it hears a rocket launch, it triggers the sound trigger and the camera goes. And that's how that works. I set up the settings to what I think is going to be, you know, applicable at the time. And then I turn this bad boy on and I let her rip, and we'll, you know, hopefully it catches it. We'll see what happens. So here's an example of one. Again, here's this shot, same shot as before. I'm pretty proud of this shot. This is one of the first shots that I ever knew exactly what I wanted before I even went there. I knew I was going down with Kip to FAR, and I knew that FAR was very cluttered. It's got equipment everywhere, right? And so I also knew that they had this tower, and so I went halfway up this sketchy tower that felt like it was falling apart, and I was gonna get you know, like I could get some tennis shots or something when I walk on it. I put the camera halfway up. I aimed the camera down at Kip's launch tower because it was lower in elevation. I aimed it down, focused on the top of the railing, and then aimed it back up level and just hoped. And it ended up working pretty well. Remote cameras allow you to put your camera in places of peril that you wouldn't, you know, put yourself. So there's a Kit Fox rocket on fire. On the right, my buddy Julian, same guy as before, he put a GoPro below his camera. It looks really nice. Here's some other ones. So it helps eliminate also things like heat distortion. So especially if you're out at somewhere like Black Rock or in the middle of the desert somewhere and it's hot, heats up the ground, and when you're like half a mile or, you know, whatever away from these rockets, that heat causes distortion in the air, and when you got a long lens, the rocket still looks wobbly, right? Looks like a wet noodle. And so having a remote camera there is really nice, because then you get these beautiful photos, and I mean, very little effort on your part. All right, not all rocket photos are launch photos. Some other types of photos are still important. So when you're putting the rocket together, sometimes you can take photos that are really beautiful of assembling the rocket, and you can take those pictures for other reasons too. Did I, do up my quick link? Did I put that ejection charge in? All of those pre-launch thoughts that run through your brain at T-minus 10 seconds, right? You can take some really nice pictures of that stuff, and it's also really good for documentation. If you launch your rocket and something happens to it, the recovery doesn't work out as expected, you could go back and look and see, how did I pack my chute? Did I pack it weird? Did a line get tangled up when I was packing it? So, I love these recovery shots of under chutes. I think they look really nice. They're not launch shots, I think they look just as nice, right? And then I like these ground hit shots too. On the left is my buddy who tried to bust my record down in Phoenix. He busted it, but he busted his nose cone too, so it didn't count. And then on the right is obviously Mesos again. I love how that photo tells a story. You can see where it bonked the ground, kind of bounced, and then the fin dragged in the playa as the parachute pulled it along. I think it looks really nice. All right, finally the last thing. So you've done all that, you took your photos, it's time to edit them if you took them in RAW. So some software, Snapseed and GIMP are free. Snapseed is a phone-based software, and GIMP is for Windows, and I think Mac you can use it as well. Lightroom and Photoshop are paid, they're Adobe, and I use Lightroom. Here's an original shot without any editing. As again, you can see I underexposed it intentionally because I knew that my propellant was going to be bright. And then when I edit it, I just brighten everything up. I pull some detail out, and it ends up looking pretty good. I won't go through all of these settings and what they do, but this is just kind of experience over time. You just kind of go. I learned by going through the sliders. Dragging one, go blah, 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 so I forget what the original photo looks like, and then dragging it until it looks about right, and then going to the next one, same thing, blah, and then doing that over and over and over again until I get a photo that I like. Nowadays, I kind of know what I'm looking for. I kind of know what I want my photo to look like, and so I kind of know what to do in order to get there. So it takes me about 5 or 10 minutes still, but it depends on the photo and how much detail I want to put into it. Here's the Mesos photo, same thing. So you've done that, you edit that one photo, and then you go through 2,500 more. This is all one launch. This is the June launch of last year, and it's skipping through it. But this is about a quarter of the photos. I didn't want to bother putting the rest of them in there. So that's about a quarter of the photos from that launch. And so a lot of that effort goes into going into every single one of those photos, figuring out which ones are even usable, and then parsing them out, and then going into each one again, and then is this one good enough to post? Is this one good enough to edit? Is it worth putting my time into? And then that takes several hours. But
what percentage do you think you get, or at least even before you even edit them, but even are worth editing? Is it 10%? Is it 1%?
It totally depends. So this particular day, I used this intentionally and maliciously because I had my remote out there just doing that, going nuts, right? Whenever one rocket launches, this is going to trigger no matter where that rocket is. And so it took a whole bunch of photos. I had my camera out. I was taking photos all day. So that in that particular example, it's like less than 10%. If I'm being very selective and deliberate about what photos I'm taking, maybe like 60%. Because like the rockets, they just leave the frame so fast and you're still shooting. So you still have to parse through and figure out which one's the rocket actually in. But yeah, you spend a lot of time just going through and figuring out which ones are even usable. With that, that's pretty much it. That's all I got. So does anybody have any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Lock diamonds.
Yeah, what about?
How do you get them?
How do you get them? So shooting raw. Shooting raw, and depending on the motor, it just happens, right? Like the green motors, they just produce beautiful mock diamonds. You don't even have to do anything about it. Some of the brighter motors, by shooting in raw and maybe underexposing a little bit, you can go in and you can bring up the brightness of the entire photo, kind of like I did. Let's see if I can rewind this. Get to what I'm talking about here. Okay, with this guy. So obviously no mock diamonds here, they're occluded by smoke. But so I shoot the photo like this, and then when I edit it, I bring up the brightness. But also you can bring down the highlights, and of course the exhaust is going to be the brightest thing. So when you bring down the highlights, you're getting rid of like the just blown out whiteness of that exhaust, and as you bring that down, the mock diamonds would kind of get pulled out, if that makes sense. They'll start to appear. You don't want to do it too intensely at the risk of your photo looking like really weird. With Kip's Rocket, back in the one that I kept on showing, that remote shot, I tried my best to make it look natural, but not like I went and selected the flame and then dragged the slider down on the brightness, because that looks really weird. But yeah, you kind of do that to taste. But that's how you do it. You just bring down the brightness on the flame.
So if you've got $1,000 or whatever, what do you recommend getting?
Oh boy, that's a whole thing. It depends. It totally depends. This camera right here was an excellent deal. Go on Facebook Marketplace. You can find some used cameras for pretty inexpensive, and as long as the shutter count is not 100,000 or something crazy like that, it's probably going to be fine. I got this one for a steal, and you can find steals pretty frequently. This is a D7500, and I got it with the card, with the lens, with a battery for $500, and this is like a $1,300 camera. So you can find deals like that on like Facebook Marketplace and KSL, I'm sure, things like that. But if anybody wants to, I mean this honestly, there you go, nice.
Yeah.
If anybody wants to like buy a camera, if you want to talk to me and ask me questions, and I'm totally open for that. Just feel free to message me on Facebook, or I've got my card here if you want to send me a text or something. I'm more than happy to help.